You are running for a bus. Your lungs burn. Your legs feel like wet sand. 30 seconds of this, and you are done. Hands on knees, gasping, defeated by a vehicle that was never actually trying to escape you. It feels like proof of something. It feels like proof that your body is soft, slow, built for sitting in chairs, and not much else. But the real answer is far stranger. Somewhere in your legs, in your skin, in the exact way your foot rolls off the ground, there is a machine so efficient it once let a human being outlast an animal 4 times faster than you. Not outsmart it, not outmaneuver it, outrun it, over hours, until the animal simply stopped. You were not built to sprint. You were built for something else entirely, and almost nobody alive today has ever felt what that something else actually feels like. Think about how strange that is for a second. Every measurable athletic contest humans admire rewards speed in short bursts. The 100-meter dash, the breakaway goal, the stolen base. Your body, though, seems to have been engineered by evolution for the opposite kind of contest, one that barely exists in modern life anymore. A contest measured not in seconds, but in hours. Not in bursts, but in refusal. What would it take to actually witness that design in action, not as a theory in a textbook, but as physical evidence, preserved and undeniable? 20,000 years ago, on a stretch of dried lake bed in what is now southeastern Australia, a man ran across soft, wet mud. He left no name, no bones, no face. He left footprints. The site is called Willandra Lakes, and the specific trail he left behind is catalogued as Trackway 8, or T8 for short. What makes T8 strange is not just that it survived 20,000 years, buried and preserved by pure geological luck. It is what the footprints record. As his stride crosses the mud, it lengthens. It goes from about 1.8 meters to 1.9 meters, step by step, the signature of a body accelerating in real time. A biomechanist named Peter McAllister studied the spacing, the depth, the angle of push-off, and calculated a speed of around 37 kilometers per hour. That's close to 23 miles per hour, on mud. Wet, soft, energy-swallowing mud, the kind of surface that should have slowed him down, not sped him up. Here is the part that should stop you. McAllister's estimate suggests that on a hard, dry track, this man could plausibly have matched or beaten Usain Bolt, not a trained athlete with carbon-plated shoes and a starting block. A hunter, barefoot, on his way to somewhere, doing something so ordinary to him that he didn't know he was leaving behind the fastest fossil in human history. What was he running from? What was he running toward? Nobody knows. But the footprint doesn't lie about the speed. It is a single frozen moment of a chase, and it has been sitting in the ground since before agriculture, before cities, before almost everything you'd call civilization. If a single set of footprints can preserve near Olympic speed, what else got lost? What other physical feats vanished the moment the last person who could do them died, with nothing left behind to prove it? Consider what it actually took for that trackway to survive. The mud had to be exactly the right consistency. Wet enough to hold the shape of a foot, but stable enough to dry before wind or rain erased it. Then it had to be buried, protected from millennia of erosion, sun, and shifting sediment until the right archaeologist happened to be standing in the right spot to notice it. Every other run this man ever took in his life is gone. Every sprint, every walk, every chase vanished the moment his feet lifted off whatever ground he was standing on. This one survived by accident, which means the fastest human sprint ever recorded from the deep past isn't even necessarily his fastest. It's just the one geology happened to save. This is where the deeper story begins, and it does not start with speed. It starts with something that looks, on the surface, almost suicidal. In the early 1990s, an anthropologist named Louis Liebenberg wanted to understand something scientists had theorized about for decades, but almost never watched in person. It's called persistence hunting. Not the version where a lion sprints, catches, and kills in seconds. The other version, the version where a human simply starts running after an animal and does not stop. Liebenberg joined a group of sand hunters in the Kalahari Desert, tracking a kudu, a large antelope with the raw speed to outrun a human by a wide margin over any short distance. The hunt began in brutal heat, well over 40 degrees Celsius, and Liebenberg made a mistake that nearly killed him. He wore heavy boots meant to protect against snake bites. Good instinct. Terrible choice for a run that would last hours. As the pursuit dragged on, Liebenberg's body started failing. Heat stroke doesn't announce itself politely. It creeps in as confusion, as nausea, as a kind of detached fog where your legs keep moving but your mind starts losing the thread. He was going down. And here is the moment that matters. One of the hunters, a man named Nate, was close enough to the kudu to finish it. The animal was exhausted, cornered by heat and distance, seconds from being killed. Nate had the spear ready. He had the kill in front of him, and he walked away from it to help Liebenberg back to camp instead. Why would a hunter abandon a kill that close, after hours of pursuit, for someone who wasn't even part of his community? Later, Nate admitted something that reframes the entire moment. He said he'd stopped sweating himself. In that heat, on that chase, he had pushed himself right up to the edge of his own body's limits, close enough to recognize the danger Liebenberg was in because he was standing right next to it. This wasn't a controlled experiment. It wasn't a documentary crew with medics on standby. It was two men hours into a heat that should have stopped both of them, one making a split-second choice to save a stranger over collecting a meal his community needed. Persistence hunting, it turns out, is not a metaphor. It really can push the human body to the exact edge of what it can survive. Sit with what Nate actually gave up in that moment. Hours of pursuit, in extreme heat, over rough terrain for a community that depended on that meat. The kudu was right there, exhausted, cornered, seconds from death. Every ounce of effort spent that day was about to pay off, and he walked away from the payoff anyway. Not because Liebenberg was in his community. Not because there was some rule requiring it. He recognized the specific dangerous fog of heat exhaustion because his own body had come close enough to the same edge to know exactly what it looked like from the outside. That's not just physical endurance. That's a kind of embodied expertise. An intimate, first-hand knowledge of exactly how far a human body can be pushed before it fails, learned the only way it can be learned, by nearly failing yourself. For a long time, this kind of story got treated as an anthropological curiosity, a rare relic practiced by a small number of remaining hunter-gatherer groups in southern Africa, a fading technique on its way to extinction. That assumption turned out to be almost completely wrong. In 2024, researchers combed through more than 8,000 historical texts, diaries, ethnographies, missionary records, colonial accounts, hunting journals, looking for any documented case of a human chasing an animal to exhaustion without weapons doing the real work. What they found rewrote the map entirely. 391 documented cases, not clustered in one desert, scattered across nearly every inhabited continent in climates that have nothing in common with the Kalahari. 16th century Texas, where hunters ran down deer on foot. 19th century Newfoundland, cold, wet, forested, where hunters chased stags across the terrain until the animals collapsed. 1950s Chad, antelope pursued the same way sand hunters pursued kudu, half a continent and half a century apart. Even Hawaii in the 1800s, where goat hunters used a version of the same strategy, falling behind as the goats fled up rocky terrain, then closing the distance while the goats rested, because a goat's burst of speed recovers faster than its stamina does. That's roughly 10 times more documented cases than researchers previously had access to. 10 times, which means persistence hunting wasn't a fringe technique invented by one group in one specific environment. It shows up wherever humans exist, adapted to heat, to cold, to mountains, to forest, to desert. If a hunting strategy this demanding, this exhausting, this dangerous keeps independently appearing across unrelated cultures thousands of miles and centuries apart, what does that tell you about how deep it runs in the human body itself? It suggests this isn't a trick someone figured out. It's a capability someone rediscovered over and over, because the body was already built for it. Picture how differently these environments would have punished a mistake. The Kalahari punishes you with dry heat, with dehydration, with a landscape offering almost no shade for hours at a stretch. Newfoundland punishes you with cold that saps energy from muscles even while you're moving, with wet ground that steals traction with every stride. Chad's terrain and Hawaii's volcanic rock share almost nothing in common except difficulty. And yet hunters in every one of these places arrived independently at the same basic insight. An animal's top speed is a resource with a limited supply, but a human's ability to keep moving, slowly, steadily, without stopping, is a resource that barely seems to run out at all. Nobody handed that insight down through a single, unbroken lineage stretching from Africa to Newfoundland. It kept getting rediscovered, in isolation, by people who had never met each other, separated by oceans and centuries. That kind of independent repetition is usually a sign of something real, not something invented. Now, here's where the popular version of this story usually gets something wrong, and it's worth correcting, because it changes what the whole thing means. The common assumption is that persistence hunters were opportunists, that they went after the weak, the sick, the very young or the very old, the animals already halfway to death, the easy targets that any predator would pick off first. It's a tidy theory. It's also mostly false. Researchers went back and examined the skeletal remains of animals known to have been killed through persistence hunting, looking for exactly this pattern, expecting to confirm it. Instead of 19 identifiable kills, only 4 were very young or very old. The rest, the overwhelming majority, were healthy adults in peak physical condition, animals with nothing wrong with them. Animals that, in a short sprint, would have vanished over the horizon in seconds. That finding flips the entire narrative. This wasn't about picking off the weak, it was about outlasting the strong. The advantage wasn't cunning exploitation of vulnerability, it was raw endurance, applied with such precision that it neutralized an animal's greatest strength, speed, by simply refusing to let the chase end. Picture the actual mismatch for a moment. A healthy adult kudu, undamaged, uninjured, with nothing physically limiting it, can cover ground at speeds no unaided human will ever match in a straight sprint. On paper, that animal should simply vanish over the first ridge and never be seen again. Instead, hours later, that same animal is standing still, legs trembling, unable to run another step, while the much slower creature that's been chasing it the entire time walks calmly into range. That is not the story of a predator picking off something already broken. That is the story of raw physiology losing to something almost nobody thinks to measure, the simple, stubborn refusal to stop. Think about what that actually requires. Not a burst of effort, not a clever ambush. Hours of sustained pursuit, in heat, without stopping, against an animal that is faster than you in every single moment except the one at the very end. What kind of body makes that possible? And what was happening to the humans who couldn't keep up? Because running down prey was never the only story. Ancient humans weren't just chasing, they were also being hunted, sometimes from directions nobody expected. In 1924, a skull was discovered in South Africa belonging to a child somewhere between 2 and 3 million years old, a juvenile of the species Australopithecus africanus, one of humanity's distant ancestors long before anything resembling modern Homo sapiens existed. It became known as the Taung child, and for decades, scientists assumed it died the way so many early hominins probably died, killed by a large ground predator, a leopard, perhaps a saber-toothed cat, dragged off and consumed. The skull carries damage that seemed to fit that story. Except when researchers looked closer at the punctures around the eye sockets, something didn't add up. The marks weren't shaped like the bite pattern of a big cat. They were shaped like talons. The current leading interpretation is that the Taung child was killed not by something on the ground, but by something in the air, a large bird of prey, similar in behavior to a modern crowned eagle, a bird strong enough to snatch and kill prey many times its own body weight. Try to picture the actual scene that this evidence implies. A small child walking near a group, perhaps only briefly out of sight, perhaps not even that far from safety. No warning growl, no rustle of grass, no scent carried on the wind the way a ground predator might announce itself. Just a sky, and then talons. The entire suite of adaptations that let a human being chase down a kudu across an open plain. The sweating, the endurance, the ability to watch the horizon for danger, does nothing against a threat approaching from directly overhead. Which means outrunning a predator on the ground, The entire skill set that let humans chase down kudu and deer and antelope across 3 continents wasn't enough to guarantee survival. There was no outrunning something that came from directly above you, with no warning, no footsteps, no scent on the wind. How do you build endurance against a threat you can't hear coming? You don't, not fully. What you build instead is vigilance, social groups, the constant low-grade awareness that danger doesn't only come from the direction you're watching. That kind of pressure, predators above and predators alongside, shaped more than just leg muscles. It shaped attention itself. And the relationship between predator and prey didn't stay one-directional for long, historically speaking. At a site in Schöningen, Germany, researchers uncovered something 300,000 years old that flips the usual hunter and hunted story on its head. Alongside the remains of a saber-toothed cat, one of the most feared predators of that era, they found evidence that a member of Homo heidelbergensis, an ancestor species that predates modern humans, had used one of that very cat's bones as a tool. A hammer, specifically, worked and shaped for use. Somewhere in that fossil bed is a physical trace of an extraordinary reversal. An animal that could kill a human without much effort became, after death, a resource that a human shaped with his own hands. Predator and prey, hunter and hunted, blurring into the same bone. Imagine holding that bone, if you could. Somewhere in its shape is the memory of an animal that could have killed the very hand now gripping it, an animal whose bite could crush bone that a human's could not, whose ambush speed outclassed anything a hominin could match in the open. And yet, there it is. Repurposed, worked, useful. Not out of disrespect for what it once was. Simply because survival doesn't leave room for sentiment. A dead threat becomes a tool. A predator becomes a resource. The line between hunter and hunted was never as fixed as it feels from the safety of the present. It's easy to imagine the arms race between humans and predators as a straight line, humans getting steadily safer, steadily more dominant, over hundreds of thousands of years. The Schöningen bone suggests something messier, a long stretch of overlap where being eaten and doing the eating were both live possibilities, sometimes for the very same creature, separated only by time. Now, it would be dishonest to tell you that persistence hunting is settled science universally accepted, case closed. It isn't. Not every researcher agrees that it shaped human evolution the way popular science content often implies. Critics call it a just-so story, a term borrowed from evolutionary biology for an explanation that sounds satisfying, fits the available evidence a little too neatly, and gets repeated until it feels like fact, without being rigorously tested against alternatives. Their argument has real weight. Among modern hunter-gatherer groups studied by anthropologists, persistence hunting is documented far less often than ambush hunting, trapping, or communal hunting using groups and terrain to corner prey. If persistence hunting were really the dominant strategy that built the human body, shouldn't it show up more often in the hunting cultures still practicing today? That's a fair question, and it doesn't have a clean answer. Maybe persistence hunting was never meant to be an everyday strategy, but a specific tool used under specific conditions, late dry season, particular prey, particular terrain, deployed rarely precisely because it's so physically extreme. Maybe the traits it selected for, the sweating, the tendons, the joints, came from a mix of hunting strategies working together over enormous timescales, not one dramatic chase at a time. There's also a subtler problem critics point to. Documenting persistence hunting is genuinely difficult. It doesn't leave the same kind of obvious archaeological footprint that a spear point or a butchered bone does. A successful chase might end with nothing more than a single stone tool used once to finish an exhausted animal, indistinguishable from the debris of any other kill. That means the technique could be simultaneously rare in the historical record and common in prehistory, or exactly the opposite could be true, and there would be almost no way to fully untangle which. Uncertainty like that isn't a flaw in the science. It's an honest reflection of how thin the evidence gets the further back you go. The honest position is that persistence hunting is a compelling, evidence-backed hypothesis, not a proven law. And strangely, that uncertainty makes the story more interesting, not less. It means your body might carry the fingerprints of a strategy that was rare even in the world that built it, a specialized tool reached for only when everything lined up. So what did line up physically to make this even possible? Because whatever the frequency, the capability is undeniably real, and it comes down to something you probably take for granted every single day of your life. Sweat. Almost no other land mammal cools its body by sweating the way you do. Most predators, the ones with real top-end speed, cheetahs, wolves, lions, cool themselves primarily through panting, pushing air rapidly across a wet tongue, and airway to shed heat. There's a catch built into that system. Panting works best when the animal slows down or stops because sprinting and rapid open-mouth breathing don't combine efficiently. That's why a cheetah's incredible speed comes with an expiration date measured in seconds, not minutes. The engine overheats fast, and it has to stop to cool down. Your body solved this problem differently, and the solution is written into your skin. You're covered nearly head to toe in eccrine sweat glands, millions of them, releasing moisture that evaporates and pulls heat away from your body continuously. Combine that with comparatively little body hair, and you get something almost no other mammal has: the ability to shed heat while still moving at speed. You never have to stop the chase to cool down. The animal you're chasing does. Every predator built around panting eventually has to choose between running and breathing. You don't have to choose. That single difference, sweat glands and hairless skin, is arguably the quiet, unglamorous piece of biology that let persistence hunting work at all. Not raw strength, not sharper senses. A cooling system that keeps running when everything else has to stop. Consider the actual numbers involved. Some estimates put the number of sweat glands across an adult human body in the millions, spread almost uniformly across the skin, an evaporative cooling system unmatched anywhere else in the animal kingdom. A horse sweats, but nowhere near as effectively. A dog barely sweats at all outside its paw pads, relying almost entirely on panting. Even other primates, your closest living relatives, don't come close to matching human sweat output. Somewhere in the evolutionary past, a version of you traded away thick body hair and gained a cooling system so effective that heat itself stopped being the limiting factor in how far you could run. That's an enormous trade. Fur offers protection from sun, from cold nights, from insects. Losing it for the sake of better heat regulation is the kind of adaptation that only makes sense if endurance running was worth an enormous amount to survival. Have you ever wondered why a light jog on a hot day feels more sustainable than it should? Why your body seems almost designed to handle heat that would stop other animals cold? Now you know it is designed for exactly that. But sweating alone doesn't explain everything, because the traits most associated with running, long legs, springy tendons, and efficient stride took a long time to fully evolve. Long before Homo erectus developed the elongated Achilles tendon that acts almost like a spring, storing and releasing energy with every stride, earlier hominins didn't have those adaptations yet. So how did persistence hunting start before the body had finished building the tools for it? A 2022 simulation study offers a surprising answer. Maybe it didn't start with running at all. The researchers modeled persistence hunting using walking alone, no running whatsoever, and found that it still worked as a viable strategy. It took roughly twice as long. It caused significantly more exhaustion for the hunter. But it was still enough over time to run prey down through pure relentlessness rather than speed. That finding matters because it suggests persistence hunting could have existed before the body was specialized for running at all, practiced by hominins who simply outlasted their prey on foot, one exhausting step after another, long before evolution handed down the springy tendons and long legs that would later make the same strategy faster and less brutal. The running-specific traits weren't necessarily the origin of the behavior. They may have been the upgrade that came after, refining a strategy that already worked, just slower and harder. Picture what that early version would have actually looked like. No spring in the step, no elastic tendon storing and releasing energy with each stride. Just a hominin walking, hour after hour, following tracks, refusing to give up ground even when the prey animal pulled far ahead, trusting that persistence itself would eventually matter more than speed. Twice as long. Far more exhausting. And still, according to the model, still enough to work. That's a strategy built on patience before it was ever built on power, which says something about what actually mattered most in this whole story. It wasn't the legs that came first, it was the willingness to keep going. That reframes the whole story one more time. This wasn't a single invention, a lightning bolt moment where some genius hominin discovered a trick and passed it down perfectly formed. It was a strategy that got better over evolutionary time, alongside the body evolving to support it, a feedback loop stretching across hundreds of thousands of years. Walking becoming running, exhaustion becoming efficiency. One small adaptation compounding into the next. And speed, or even endurance, was never the whole equation anyway. The final piece of this puzzle has almost nothing to do with athleticism at all. Sand hunters in the Kalahari didn't just chase whatever kudu happened to cross their path. They chose their moment with an almost obsessive precision. They hunted specifically at the end of the dry season when kudu were already malnourished, already running a caloric deficit before the chase even began. They deliberately avoided healthy pregnant cows, animals that, for reasons tied to physiology and risk, weren't worth the pursuit. They exploited full moon nights when prey stayed active and alert through the entire night instead of resting, arriving at dawn already tired before the hunt had officially started. And in one of the strangest details in the entire record, they used the fact that a shift in diet after seasonal rains gave kudu diarrhea, which made the animals easier to track, their trail more obvious, and physically weaker to boot. Think about the sheer volume of accumulated knowledge behind a decision like waiting for the end of the dry season, or timing a hunt to a specific lunar phase. None of that comes from a single hunter's lifetime of trial and error. It comes from generations of observation, passed down, tested, refined, argued over, until a body of ecological knowledge existed that could predict with real accuracy exactly when a kudu's body would be at its weakest before the chase even began. That's not instinct. That's something closer to an oral, embodied science carried in memory instead of writing, and it was every bit as essential to the hunt's success as any muscle or tendon. None of that is about how fast a human can run. It's about reading an ecosystem so fluently that the chase itself becomes almost a formality, the final step in a plan built weeks or months in advance. The outrunning people find so dramatic, the image of a human sprinting an animal into the ground, was really just the closing scene of a much longer story. One built on lunar cycles, seasonal stress, digestive biology, and decades of accumulated observation passed down through a community. Speed didn't win the hunt. Knowledge did. Speed just finished it. So what do you actually do with all of this? You are not going to persistence hunt a kudu across a desert. You will probably never need your Achilles tendon to fire like a coiled spring across 20 kilometers of open terrain. But something in you is still running the same underlying operating system that made all of this possible, and it shows up in far smaller, far quieter ways than you might expect. Notice how your body handles heat the next time you're outside on a difficult day. Sweating steadily, uncomfortably, but still moving. Still functioning in a way that would stop almost every other large animal on the planet cold. That's not a modern inconvenience. That's an ancient advantage. Still running exactly as designed, just with nothing left to chase. Notice how endurance, not explosive effort, is what actually gets you through the hardest parts of your week, your training, your work, your goals, the same principle that let a slower human beat a faster animal by simply refusing to stop. Speed impresses. Endurance wins. That was true on the Kalahari Sand, and it's still quietly true in your life now, even when there's no animal at the end of it, even when the only thing you're outlasting is your own instinct to quit early. Notice, too, how much of what actually determines whether you succeed at something difficult has nothing to do with talent in the moment, and everything to do with preparation laid down long before the moment arrives. The sand hunter's real advantage over the kudu wasn't discovered in the middle of the chase. It was already decided weeks earlier in the choice of season, the reading of the moon, the patient accumulation of knowledge about an animal's habits and weaknesses. Your hardest days work the same way. The version of you that shows up, exhausted, that keeps moving when quitting would be so much easier, is drawing on something built long before that specific day ever began. Every rep, every rehearsal, every small discipline you kept when nobody was watching becomes the reserve you draw from when the chase finally starts to matter. You rarely get to see that reserve directly. You only feel its absence or its presence when you're already deep into something hard. There is something almost humbling in realizing that the body carrying you through an ordinary difficult day is the same basic model that once outlasted animals built for pure speed, across deserts, forests, mountains, and coastlines, on nearly every continent humans ever reached. You inherited that, not as a story, as tissue, as glands, as the particular way your legs and lungs and skin work together without you ever having to think about it. Most days, that inheritance goes completely unused, buried under commutes and screens and chairs. But it hasn't gone anywhere. It's still there, waiting. The same design that once meant the difference between eating and not eating, between a community surviving a hard season or not. It's worth remembering, too, that almost everything covered here nearly vanished from memory entirely. A footprint that could have washed away in a single storm. A near-fatal chase that could have gone unrecorded if Liebenberg hadn't survived to write it down. A skull fragment that sat in a drawer for decades before anyone re-examined the punctures around its eyes with fresh eyes. History is full of details this close to being lost forever, saved only by accident, by timing, by someone deciding to look one more time at something everyone else had already stopped questioning. That, too, mirrors the hunt itself. Persistence isn't only physical. Sometimes it's just refusing to stop looking. The bus you failed to catch never stood a chance against you in the way that mattered. It just wasn't the kind of race your body was built to win. If this changed the way you think about your own body, hit like and subscribe for more stories hiding in plain sight. And the next time you feel that specific, humbling exhaustion of running for something and losing, a bus pulling away, a deadline slipping past, remember what your body actually is. It was never built to win in the first 30 seconds. It was built to still be standing hours later when everything faster than you has already stopped.